Viserys Targaryen here, and I just wanted you to know, Christmas is coming.
All right, hello YouTube. Welcome back to the Grease Guy YouTube channel. Welcome back to 25 Days of Winds of Winter. We're going to be doing all of your guys' favorite theory. Young Griff is a Blackfyre, and there's a lot of different variations given on who is actually Young Griff's like parent, or who does he get the Blackfyre genetics from. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but we're going to talk about a lot of the evidence supporting why I think he could be a Blackfyre. Whereas I do like the Young Griff actually being Aegon theory that we talked about yesterday. This is the one I do prefer, and I'll be completely honest, I'm just completely biased to liking this theory. I just feel like it does more for the story. I think it adds more conflict. I think it ties in a lot of the other stories outside of A Song of Ice and Fire really nicely if this is the case. And also, I also have a little Blackfyre thing on my wall right there on the corner next to my Stannis one. So, you know, I'm a sucker. I'm a sucker for having more Blackfyre content in the main story, given that we've been told the Blackfyres are extinct at this time. So again, let's start with some evidence of, I think, why he could be a Blackfyre. So I think the first one, and I think it's kind of one of the more relevant ones, is the Golden Company. So when I first made my video talking about Young Griff being a Blackfyre, it was about a year and a half ago, or I don't know about a year and a half, but it was pretty long ago. It's before I even had this mic. Audio quality wasn't great, and again, I went back and looked at a lot of these videos just to see what my thoughts were and how they've changed and what you guys' thoughts were, especially because they kind of can help maybe mold my own thoughts, and we'll talk about somebody's comment actually in this video. But when I look at that, and it's like, I was at a time where I didn't know as much about the Blackfyre era and the Golden Company's founding, and I look back now and I sit here and I'm going, this whole idea that the Golden Company are going to support a dragon, it doesn't matter what dragon it was, doesn't seem to add up to me. Like, I get the reasoning is like, okay, we've gone through a couple of generations now. We're much further away from a lot of the significant Blackfyres. The last one, namely, being Meleys in the male line. The Blackfyre name could have, at this point, just started to die out, I guess. And so the people that are really loyal to them kind of starting to die out. And so a lot of these people are just exiled lords that want to go home, and knights and things like that. And I get that, right? There's the human nature of it, but the whole company was founded on the premise of not liking the Targaryens. Like, they've gone and done multiple invasions into Westeros and the Targaryen reign. I find it very hard to believe. And if we even look at the Golden Company from this point of view, if the Golden Company really wanted to go home, why did they never support Viserys or even Dany when she was gaining in power, when Dany got the Unsullied, when she was taking out Slaver's Bay? Where was the Golden Company? They weren't going to do that, right? Like, why, if they cared so much about going home, why didn't they present themselves to Dany for supporting her, right? Having a significant, one of the best armies, probably the best army in Essos right now, on your side would make it significantly easier to try and take the throne, right? To get out of Slaver's Bay, to establish that order and then leave. And so that adds a question mark for me. Now, the other question mark I have with the Golden Company and all these things, it's like, why are they only getting into all of this because of Young Griff? It seems very suspicious, especially given that Young Griff is the most mysterious one of the remaining Targaryens that we have. It's very suspicious. Like, it's just very suspicious. It's also then even more suspicious that it seems like Illyrio, you know, already had the dealings with the Golden Company to try to get them on board. It just, there's just so many things here that just don't fall into place. And I talked about this in the Targaryen video a little bit. Like, yes, Young Griff has leadership qualities. Yes, he has the Targaryen look. But is there also already, you know, like a precedent for this in the past? Right? The second Blackfyre Rebellion follows almost the same path, where you have a guy that is pretending to be somebody else, but then turns out to be a Blackfyre. You kind of see where the lines add up. Was that direct foreshadowing? And so we'll talk about that a little bit later, because I do want to talk about the Duncan Egg novellas, because I think the significance and the focus of those novellas is very important to the story now. I think there's a lot you can look at that story, and it's going to be very relevant when we get to Dream specifically, in my opinion. But let's look at some other evidence. So first of all, I do want to say this theory is plausible, because again, we've been told that, one, the male line has ended. We've George made it very specific. He said nothing about the female line, but he brought up the male line. The male line is over, but we don't know anything about the female line, right? This is very relevant even further back. When you look at, like, where did the sword Blackfyre go, there's a lot of empty holes there that George just has not filled yet that are there, right? So it's very clear that there could have been a female line that I think personally could have been Illyrio's wife, right? It seems like Illyrio cared for a lot about his wife. We get some kind of disturbing things, honestly, about his wife, and that he cared about her quite a lot. So that leads again to another thing. Why does young Griff get all of this privilege that Dany and Viserys never got? And the whole idea is here is like, okay, well, Aegon's going to be a better king because they're handcrafting him and all these things. But it's like, that doesn't really seem to add up, given that they could have tried, if they had helped Viserys from a really early age, right? When he first leaves Westeros, they could have also tried to mold him, right? That wasn't too late. Viserys was still a very young age at that time, but they didn't, right? They didn't surround Viserys with a lot of Targaryen loyalists and people that he could rely on, getting him the right education, helping mold him as a person, alongside of Dany as well. Illyrio and Varys didn't do those things. They were not part of the plan, right? And that's kind of another thing to mention is, like, there's a lot of holes when you look at the first book when it comes to, okay, how does this affect young Griff, who's going to come into the story later on? And the whole point of this is, like, the Blackfyres really were not invented during this time. We don't really get the Blackfyres, I believe, until Storm of Swords is when their first name dropped. It might be Clash. I might be misremembering, but pretty much put it this way. When George was first making the books, the Blackfyres were probably not a thing. Maybe he had some idea that he wanted that to be at some point in the story, but he didn't have the Blackfyre name down. He didn't have what their significance was to the story. He didn't have all this written out. That came a lot later as we go down into the story. And so I find it interesting that as we get more Blackfyre lore and information, we get this kid, young Griff, who it seems like is very suspicious and could be a Blackfyre. It just seems very interesting in that regard. So let's talk about some other information that I think is also very relevant. So we get this theory again. We get this prophecy from Quaithe talking about this Mummer's dragon. And this is very relevant because there's only like a few people that we know that have any type of ability to be a Mummer's dragon. Young Griff seems to be at the forefront of this. Now, some people mentioned in the last video that I did about this, where in that video I was talking about it a half ago, about that this could be, right, the Mummers being Varys and Illyrio, and then Aegon being the dragon. So that doesn't specifically make him a Mummer's dragon. And I understand your point there, but I would go that this is more just a Mummer's dragon. Like, this is the fake dragon. We also have some information that I want to talk about right after this that may even support that idea. But think about that, right? Like, that's really relevant. I mentioned in my last video, maybe this could be Orain Waters, just based upon the fact that, you know, he has Velaryon blood. The Velaryons have Targaryen blood, kind of distant at this point, but they still do. They're still very relevant. They have a lot of Valyrian features that also look a lot like the Targaryens. So it's a nice little shout out to put in there, but doesn't really make a lot of sense in my opinion. So I think if you're going to say it's not young Griff and that this doesn't apply to young Griff, it's probably someone like Illyrio or Varys because of, you know, them being the Mummers and then young Griff being the dragon. But let's look at another comment that we have from Ashley in this video I did about a year ago. But she mentioned something I didn't even talk about in that last video. But there's another thing when we look at Maquaro's dragon vision. In it, he sees dragons old and young, true and false, bright and dark. Now, this could, again, imply there being some sort of fake dragon and a dark dragon. Both of these could refer to the Blackfyres, right? Dark, referring to the black of the Blackfyres, their sigil, but also false, meaning that Aegon himself is not actually Aegon. Young Griff is not Aegon. So I thought that was also some relevant information to add to the topic. And so this kind of gets us to what is the significance of young Griff being a Blackfyre? And it's very significant given the fact that I think it adds a lot more conflict and tension. Now, again, this can still work regardless, right? If, let's say, Aegon actually is the true Aegon, right? Or young Griff is the true Aegon, this still can work if Dany believes he's not that. Or if, you know, young Griff comes off as kind of an ass, or he comes off very impulsive, arrogant, like I thought he might actually because of how quickly he's going to come to power. that can still create a conflict. But I think it's a more interesting conflict if we get the idea that Young Griff is this Blackfyre character that Illyrio has been, you know, shaping for rule and has been basically been the real person he's backing. He was using Dany and Viserys for his own gains, which we kind of already knew, and that seems kind of established going back to book 1. And so we look at this and we go, okay, well, this is going to have a lot of conflict for Dany, right? How is Dany going to trust? Like, she still views Illyrio as a friend that helped them. That's going to be interesting because it's going to break trust there. We're also going to have this idea that Dany is going to have to battle with, is this her family or not? She is still someone that longs for home and a family after Viserys' death, even before Viserys. And so I look at all of this and I go, okay, that's interesting. We can still have this idea of a Dance of the Dragons. If Young Griff gets a dragon, he is a Blackfyre. He can, that still has, you know, Targaryen blood. He can still get a dragon. But also it ties back to the Blackfyre rebellions, which again are much closer to the normal story, right? Some of our characters that are living in the story were literally present when Meleys was killed. Barristan was that character that killed Meleys. And I think it's an interesting wrap into Barristan, who's with Dany's camp, who Young Griff could possibly be the last male Blackfyre at this time. So that could be really awesome as well. And so there's just so many nice culminations. This kind of gets me to the Dunk and Egg novellas, where, again, before the Dunk and Egg novellas are really our main source of information into the Blackfyres, outside of like maybe the World of Ice and Fire. Because again, Fire and Blood Part 1 doesn't get to that point, right? We're still, even in that, we're still a couple kings away from the first Blackfyre rebellion. We're getting some of the, we're starting at the very beginning of Fire and Blood Part 2. We'll start to get to some of the factors that start to lead to why that happens, especially with Daeron's reign. But again, we're not there yet. A World of Ice and Fire gives us like a brief summary of things that may have happened. But the Dunk and Egg novellas are really our understanding of what happened through the average person's eyes, or what really happened, why people liked this side or this side. And so those Dunk and Egg novellas feel very relevant to the story in a way that they're presenting why people would have liked the Blackfyres. And when you have a situation in which I think Young Griff is going to be viewed very positively, taking down the Lannisters and Tommen and this faction that the common people don't really like at this time, he's going to be viewed as a hero, right? As this great leader, this great, you know, Targaryen king or whatever coming back, the Targaryen reign coming back. And it's going to be very similar to the way we look at a character like Daemon Blackfyre. When you look at Daemon Blackfyre, he was very well loved. People really liked him. He was a great sword fighter. He was someone that, you know, maybe wasn't the most intellectually smart from what we can tell, but he was a great leader of people. He was someone that inspired loyalty. And so you're going to have all of that, right? And then you're going to have how kind of the Targaryen's going to be viewed at this time with Dany, who's going to be coming over with a very foreign army. She's going to be someone that's coming over with dragons and bad rumors about her. That's going to be misconstrued, right? Her killing her brother, right? Or allowing her brother to be killed is something that the people of Westeros will look at much differently than she will. We, as the audience, understand Dany. We understand why she did those things, why she allowed it to happen. But the people of Westeros are going to be going, you let your brother get molten gold poured on his head and then you watched? Out of context, that sounds quite bad. And so you're going to sit here and you're going to go, okay, now you're going to understand why people support Young Griff. Because you're going to see these, again, the Golden Company is founded out of Westeros. Like they are Westerosi people for the most part. And so they come back and you're sitting here going, yeah, it's just these exiled people coming back home, right? That's how you're going to look at it. Whereas Dany's going to have probably Dothraki, unsullied, very foreign armies that have no like foundings within Westeros. And so you look at this and you go, there's a very easy split you can see, which is a nice wrinkle if Young Griff is a Blackfyre. It ties into the Dunk and Egg novellas really well. And like I talked about with the third Dunk and Egg novella earlier on, that story really, in my opinion, resonates with a character like Young Griff. They seem very similar, where they have this identity, they're trying to basically say they are, but they're someone else. And I think that could be really relevant. Now, the difference here would be, I don't think Young Griff knows he's a Blackfyre, right? I think Young Griff very much thinks that he is this Aegon Targaryen type character. And so this kind of all leads us into maybe some part of this end of this video where I talk about, you know, some of the counter arguments, right, to the video I did yesterday. So some of the counter arguments that I mentioned is like the whole idea that Varys confirms that Aegon is a Targaryen at the end of the book with Kevin. can really just be this idea that, again, Varys is trying to convince himself that he actually is Aegon. And two, he doesn't want anyone to hear him saying that he's a Blackfyre, because that could ruin all of his plans. The name Blackfyre and Targaryen hold two different values, right? The Blackfyre name is not great. Again, the last one was Melee's. It's not great. You don't want people to know Young Griff is a Blackfyre, even if that doesn't really matter when it comes to the context of Young Griff still has a claim to the throne, even when he's a Blackfyre. It's all about what people's perception of him is going to be, and that's important. And so Varys doesn't know who's listening right now, right? He doesn't know if there's someone that maybe a serving woman comes by, or a stable boy or a message runner comes by and hears this, and now you're like, okay, not good. And so that's where I think Varys is playing at here, right? I think Varys is playing on this idea that he wants to believe this lie. And also, if somebody, walks by, it's like, okay, the lie spreads even more. But he doesn't want people to understand that he is a Blackfyre if that is the case, right? It's King's Landing. There could be somebody anywhere. And so, yeah, that is my main thing for Young Griff being a Blackfyre. Let me know if I missed anything. If you guys have anything you want to add it down in the comments. And yeah, this is one of my favorite theories. I think a lot of you guys know that. I had to make sure I saved this one for a little bit, later in it. I wanted to talk about this one first, but I had some other things that I was talking about. We're talking about a lot of the North, and this whole event is going to be focused a lot on the North. For one, it fits the event being that it's a winter event and it's Christmas. So again, we're taking a little bit of a break from the northern stuff, and then we kind of get back into it as the event kind of comes to a wind down. But thank you guys all for watching. I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.